we're back. It has been a hot minute since I've filmed anything for the channel or the pod. I think the last thing I filmed or whatever was actually on my birthday, which that file has actually just been sitting in my computer. I haven't done anything with it, but I will get around to releasing it. But that was at the end of February, and now we are at the end of March. And so I have a couple videos filmed, one based on, I guess, a viewer suggestion, which I am quite excited to film. However, I'm deciding to film a podcast first because it just feels a little less intimidating, a little less scary. But now that I'm starting to yap in front of the camera again, I'm kind of like, okay, yeah, like I know how to do this. All that being said, I've got my cup of tea, peppermint today, spearmint, sorry, different. And this is a paper tea bag for those of you guys seeing the video, the vodcast, trying to eat less microplastics. But I heard that these paper tea bags actually have a little bit anyways, even though the packaging says it doesn't. So I don't know, we'll see. If you guys know, let me know down in the comments. So the topic I have planned for today is talking about going back to medical school after doing the PhD as an MD PhD student. And the reason we're talking about it today is because we had a meeting just this week, or maybe it was the last week, I forgot, about return to clinicals for the MD PhD students, and it stressed me out, you guys. Like, it honestly, for me, is probably still about a year away. And we'll talk about graduating from the PhD as well in this episode, because I did make an update video, or kind of like a video discussing what it's like being in my 5th year now, what my graduation timeline looks like. But I don't know, we'll revisit that. I feel like it's kind of a moving target, a little moving timeline. And so this meeting was interesting because I feel like if you know what program I go to and you go to this program, you might agree with me that this is actually quite a hands-off program. So I feel like it's good and bad. Good because you're kind of trusted that you know what you're doing. You're kind of trusted that you don't need any hand-holding. But bad in the sense that sometimes it can breed a little bit of anxiety when you don't exactly know what's going to happen and what the next step is. And this like hands-offness of the program in the very, very beginning actually did make me a little bit anxious. But now that it's been a couple years, I've really just trusted that I will get through this. They've gotten hundreds of students through this in the past, and I will also get through this. And you know, yeah, just kind of going with the flow, which is very difficult for me as a type A person. And I think it was interesting to me that they called this meeting because of the mostly hands-off nature of my program, but also I think it speaks to the fact that other people are anxious about it. So I guess it's kind of good that we're all in this together. However, the fact that we have this meeting also means that I have to confront with the reality that I remember nothing from medical school. So if you guys don't know, I haven't talked about this at all on the channel, but I have talked about it before back when I was making videos on TikTok. But the structure of MD PhD programs is really something along the lines of 2 years medical school, 4 to 5 years of the PhD in the middle, and then you go back and finish medical school at the very end. Some schools do it a little bit differently. So maybe you have 1.5 years of medical school in the beginning, the PhD, and then 2 years at the end. Some do it like 2 PhD, 2, some do it 1, and then PhD, and then 3. And I also think some schools do it 3, PhD, and then 1. Anyways, there's a variety of them, but the common thread is usually that the PhD is sandwiched in the middle. Now for me, how my school structured it was 2 years of medical school in the beginning, so that includes all of your preclinical stuff, so all the basics about medicine. We take step 1, and then we do 2 clinical rotations. And for those of you who are not so familiar with kind of the lingo, step 1 is the first board exam that you have to take. There's a total of 3 steps. Steps 1 and 2 gets taken in medical school, and then step 3 gets taken in residency. Back to what I was saying. So I did 2 years of medical school, I did step 1, and I did 2 clinical rotations, and then I'm off to the PhD. So what I have left to do when I go back to medical school is the rest of my core rotations. I have to take step 2, and then I have to apply to residency. Not everyone apply to residency. I think in my program, most people do, but of course, some people decide to do a postdoc, some people decide to go into industry. Like, just because you do an MD PhD or just because you go to medical school, you're actually not necessarily bound to apply to residency. For me personally, I am interested in practicing as a doctor, and so I will be applying to residency. At least that is the plan for now. So yeah, that's what I've got to do when I go back. I guess in terms of degree progress wise, I am closer to the end of my PhD than I am to the beginning of my PhD. And in my video kind of giving the life update about where I am in my degree progress, I kind of said, oh, like kind of thinking that I would graduate maybe by the end of this year. I don't know if that's gonna happen. I don't know. There's a part of me that's like, I don't think my advisor would be so against that, and I think I can probably make the end of this year if I really wanted to. But at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of things I still want to do in my PhD that I think, you know, a couple extra months or something would be kind of nice. And so I think at this particular moment, I'm not exactly in a rush to get right back into medical school. I think they try their best to get us out in 4 years. If I were to graduate at the end of this calendar year, that would make it 3.5 for me. And so I think it's okay to take a couple more months, just take my time in finishing the PhD, take my time in, I guess, doing the things that I want to figure out intellectually, research-wise, etc., etc. Now, a question that I have been asked in the past in the time that I've been doing social media is, how the heck do you go back? Like, do you even remember anything when you go back to medical school after, you know, a break from all of the clinical knowledge while you're in the lab, doing the PhD, etc., not seeing patients at all? Like, doesn't all of that knowledge that you gathered in the first 2 years just kind of seep out of you over time in those 4.5 years? And the answer to that is yes. But in the past, when people have asked me this, I've always just been like, oh, but it happens to everyone. And I was also told not to worry too much about that. Like, this was certainly something I asked about when I was doing Second Look, when I was first admitted to this school, and talking to some of the older students and how they've navigated this in the past. And, you know, the things that they've kind of told me is just, you know, like, don't worry so much about it. It happens to all of us. All the information will come right back to you when you go back to clinical year. And I'm not so sure how much people keep up with, you know, all of their flashcards, their Anki decks from back when they were studying for step 1 during their PhD years. And at least this wasn't something that was like really strongly recommended from the people that I've talked to. And there's also something else that programs talk about to try to prevent the leakage of clinical information while you're in your PhD. And some programs call it like longitudinal clinical exposure. My program calls it the clinical competency program. And basically what these programs or courses try to do is they try to keep you engaged in the clinical aspect of things while you're in your PhD program. My take is that these programs overpromise a little bit. I think a lot of the times these programs like longitudinal clinical exposure type things are really just what's on the program's website to say, hey, we're different from all the other programs that you might be looking at. And so for me, it oftentimes feels more like a recruitment tactic or a marketing tactic. All that is to say, I think it's very, very difficult to actually accomplish what these types of programs advertise, which they advertise that it keeps people engaged in the clinical aspect of things. It helps with retaining the knowledge that the students had from the first and second years. But in reality, I think it's much more complex than that, and it's inevitable that there will be information seepage, so to speak, throughout the years that you're doing your PhD. So let me tell you guys a little bit about how the structure of this program works. At my school, we call it the Clinical Competency Program. It's on the website. Actually, like, I wonder what it says. Yeah, so throughout the PhD years, each student meets in a group of MD PhD students with a faculty member in the hospital. Students obtain patient histories, conduct physical exams with the cooperation of the patients in the hospital. All students also meet once a month in small groups with a preceptor, reviewing the pathophysiology of some of the diseases and presentations. I do think this is an appropriate kind of definition from the website, and this is, like, for the most part, my experience as well. My kind of experience with this program is that we are all assigned a clinical preceptor at the beginning of the semester. We meet in small groups. Different preceptors have different styles, so some prefer meeting on Zoom only and discussing different cases. Some are more hands-on. They want you to come in and shadow them, like, I think for 4 hours every month. So it's just one shadowing shift every month or so. And some preceptors are more just like a resource that you can reach out to if you have questions or doubts or you want to shadow them and things like that, and they'll be happy to help you. And so my experience with this course has been positive, but I will say, did it help me retain the information that I got from preclinicals? No. Even with the most hands-on preceptor who wants me to come in every month and shadow her, it does not replace the value and the knowledge that you gain from actually physically being in clinical year and being in the wards all day, every day, and then coming back home and studying medicine some more. You know, these preceptorships are great, but it doesn't replace that. And so slowly you do lose a lot of the clinical knowledge. You just can't replicate what you learned during clinical rotations with a once a month shadowing experience for 3 to 4 hours. Like, it's just impossible. When I've previously shared this on TikTok, I've talked about this clinical competency course. I also talked about some of my anxiety about losing a lot of that preclinical knowledge. When I shared this all on TikTok, one of the comments I received was, well, do you think that you should just have more clinic time during the PhD? Like, do you think the MD PhD, like during the PhD years, it should actually be more like 50-50, like you spend 2 days in clinic out of the week? And my answer to that is absolutely not. A PhD is already a full-time job, a full-time responsibility, and research should be the focus when you're a PhD student. Even though I'm an MD PhD student, during the PhD years, I'm functionally not different than the PhD students that aren't doing an MD PhD. And in fact, when I introduce myself, I usually just say I'm a PhD student in this department working with this advisor because, again, functionally, I'm not different. It's all the same requirements that I have to complete with my PhD peers. And so I don't think it's beneficial for me or my research to add additional clinic hours on top of what I'm supposed to be doing. Another thing is that I truly believe that in each phase of the MD PhD program, you should focus 100% on that phase. That is the beauty of the MD PhD program. And it's just that in the MD years, you get to focus on clinical medicine. You get to focus on being the best medical student you can be. And then in the PhD years, you're focused on doing the best research that you could possibly do. And you have that luxury as an MD PhD student without splitting your attention. And I say it's a luxury because that is not true for example, the students who are in the MD program who are worried about, trying to cram in as much research as they possibly can just to do well in the residency match. And so I think the PhD phase should be focused entirely and wholeheartedly on the research. And so to the question of, do I think there should be clinic time integrated in the PhD phase? I don't think so. And so all that is to say, I think the clinical competency programs is a net positive because at least you're getting some exposure. But at the same time, I don't think it's doing that much to prevent information leakage. And I also think that losing a lot of that preclinical knowledge that you had before is inevitable when you're just in the PhD and not really using that information. And so going back to the meeting where we talked about returning back to clinical year and the meeting that kind of spurred this whole discussion, I think it's true that MD PhD students all go through this in some capacity. Like, they feel like they've lost a lot of that preclinical information. But at the same time, even though I know that everybody goes through it in some capacity, it still made me stressed. And I guess the reason for that is just I don't have a lot of the fundamental knowledge that I used to have. And when I go back to medical school, I still have a lot of exams. Like, shelf exams happen every 6 weeks or so, or every rotation. And some rotations will use your shelf exams to determine your grade for the rotation. And then of course, there's also step 2, which will play a big part in determining where you interview for residency and potentially even where you match. And these days, when I look at something clinical, like let's say you pull up some questions from the step 1 exam, I'll know all the words and I'll know like, okay, like these are probably the important parts to this question. But I probably can't tell you that much about the pathophysiology, the risk factors, the etiology, basic science, but I'll know I used to know it, which is annoying. And so I've started doing a couple of things to mitigate some of the stress. And this isn't necessarily advice. And I'm sure some people listening to this will be like, Cindy, you are stressed out. You're overthinking this, like chill out. But I know myself. I know that this is one way to mitigate my stress is to start studying a little bit. And I also know that when I'm starting to get ready to graduate, I probably won't have the bandwidth to be doing all of this because I'll be worried and stressed about the actual dissertation defense. And so these are the couple things that I've decided to do. The first thing I've been doing is something I've been doing for quite a while now. And I started doing this even before like this whole thing started, stressing me out. And it's volunteering in my school's free clinic. I go about once a month, so it's kind of along the same veins as the clinical competency course. It keeps me warmed up, kind of prevents me from forgetting everything. but it's not really life-changing in terms of retaining the information that I had before or learning a lot of breadth of information. And of course, it's not quite the same as being on rotations. Something I started a little more recently is getting back on the Anki grind. My school has a Boards and Beyond subscription, so every week I would watch 5 to 7 or so of the step 2 videos, and then I would go into the Anki deck, which I've completely reset because I remember nothing, and I would just unsuspend all the cards that are related to those videos. I'm not taking notes or anything because a lot of it is kind of like review from before. I would watch it on 2x speed and then just let Anki do its thing. I probably only watch videos 2 to 3 times a week with a total of like 7 or so videos. Like I said, that's kind of my goal. And then I just try to keep up with the cards every single day. Only takes me about 30 minutes, and I think it's helping me starting to recover some of the previous knowledge that I had. And it's starting to be a little more satisfying again when I can actually look at something, like look at words and stuff and know what it's talking about, when I can look at lab values and like know why that is significant. My goal is honestly just to mature a couple thousand cards before I go back to medical school. Nothing too crazy. I'm not going ham, but if I could do that, I'll be pretty happy. I also want to say that I absolutely do not regret having not kept up with Anki the first 3 years of my PhD. That was a moment of bliss, not having to worry about my cards. And also because I went to a school with in-house exams, I actually made all of my own Anki cards. And so I don't know if that necessarily would have been that helpful as well. But if you were like really big into Anki or preclinical years, I guess it like wouldn't necessarily be a bad idea to keep up with it during the PhD. I don't personally know anyone who's done that, but I'm sure somebody out there is doing that. And the last thing I'm doing, slash, I guess maybe trying to get better at doing, is going through the New England Journal of Medicine and going through their case of the week. So this is something my program director actually recommended that I do when I shared some of these anxieties with her, and I think it's really, really good advice. There's a new issue of the New England Journal of Medicine every Thursday, and usually there is a case in there that you can go through. I think once the medical knowledge starts slowly coming back to me through the Boards and Beyond videos and the Anki, I'll enjoy this process of going through cases a lot more, because honestly, I really just enjoy thinking about differentials and cases. It has always been like the most enjoyable part of medical school for me. And so that's what I'm doing so far. And I think as medical school re-entry comes closer, I'll start asking attendings that I know from before if I can shadow them, or one of the preceptors, if I could shadow them or work on my presentation skills and things like that. And instead of doing Anki, once re-entry comes closer, I probably will start doing question banks again. The reason why I'm not doing question banks now is because question banks cost quite a bit of money, and I just cannot justify paying for question banks for like a year and a half before I go back. At the end of the day, I'm not talking to people about this, just to you guys, I guess. So I don't know if I'm being over worried, over stressed, the right amount of stressed, not stressed enough. I don't know. But I also know myself, and I know that thinking about re-entry and being prepared for re-entry in such a way that is comfortable for me, i.e. through doing Anki, through doing Boards and Beyond videos or whatever, is going to make me feel better in the long run. I also am perfectly aware that once I go back to the wards, I'll feel like I know nothing again. And even with like a lot of preparation, I probably will still feel like I know nothing, because that is just the nature of being a medical student, and being a medical student is humbling. And at the very least, as I'm going through my studying and preparation, some of the medical knowledge is slowly coming back. And so if nothing else, I'm feeling quite satisfied again that I'm like recalling this information. All right, everyone. So I'm gonna end the episode here. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for hearing my thoughts. Let me know what you think down below, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.